The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call, second one for 2017. And appreciate we're getting a very good turnout for this call as well. And I think we're just going to dive in. This is going to be a little bit less structured call. We don't have a guest. I just thought there are a number of issues that we should bring people up to date on and conversations that are happening inside our work that would make sure that everybody is aware of and has some chance to weigh in on, particularly around these ideas around fee-for-service models, around what housing counseling should call itself going forward, and what the future might be for HCO and CounselorMax, all of which have been topics in the past, and there seems to be some movement, and I want to make sure everybody's on top of that. But you know, the issue of the day is, of course, this is change of administration. There's a lot of new faces, certainly big changes at HUD, as well as in the rest of the administration. So we're going to start off with that and have our conversation on what we're learning about the Republican administration and on the Hill, that how things might change a little bit. We don't have a crystal ball. We're not perfect seers into the future. We're just beginning to get initial information. I want to share that with you. Certainly interested in what people's insights are on this as well. So let's dive in, and let's begin with Dr. Ben Carson at his nomination hearing. So both of us listen to it. Matthew, why don't you give your first read on it, and then I'll add in what I can.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll just hit a few kind of highlights and see if you want to fill anything in. And I think in everything from the hearing and just kind of generally, really my kind of biggest picture takeaway on Dr. Carson is, I mean, he talks a lot about government assistance, and he talks a lot about dependency, and it's pretty clear that he views a lot of government assistance programs as fostering dependency, and that he does not see that as a good thing. He certainly stressed it a few times that he is not opposed to government assistance programs, to entitlement programs specifically, but it seems clear, and he doesn't really give any details on what the alternatives might be, that he believes that we should be pursuing alternatives that are fostering self-sufficiency for people, and kind of breaking what he sees as this kind of intergenerational cycle of dependence on government assistance programs. So that's really the biggest picture takeaway that I have from the nomination hearing, and more generally just reading and listening to him. He was asked specifically about rental assistance, the rental assistance program. His response was slightly surprising. He said that he sees rental assistance as being essential, but then he kind of went on a little bit, and he said he wouldn't withdraw any entitlement programs without alternatives. So he didn't explicitly say it, but it did sound like he envisioned that rental assistance is necessary, but he might prefer some alternative with that, segueing from the current rental assistance program to some alternative. There were quite a few times where, talking about lower income folks, that he came back repeatedly to growing the economy as being the main way that you help people who are living in poverty. That if there's more and better jobs, it's clear that he sees that as the main way that the government should be helping people at the lower income levels, is by growing the economy. He did give an explanation of, so the one kind of the one housing statement that he had made prior to this that gave us some kind of insight into his thoughts on housing, was he had been very critical of the Obama administration's fair housing policy, and specifically on affirmatively furthering fair housing. I mean, he compared it to a socialist program, and just made clear that he didn't think government should be pulling levers on where people live. He was asked about that. He gave an explanation which did not make sense to me, which was essentially that he thinks that housing choice is important and that he supports the goal of the Fair Housing Act and affirmatively furthering fair housing, but that he doesn't believe that it should be this, Washington bureaucrats, that people at the state and local levels have a better idea of how to do this and that they should be the ones making these decisions. One of the Democratic senators pointed out to him that the way that the Obama rule was structured was precisely the government telling local governments and local entities to do this, not telling them how to do it. So it very much is driven by local people at the local level. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to criticize that it shouldn't be coming from Washington. Those were, I think, some of my highlights. I mean, one other big picture thing is I do think we were somewhat surprised that he did seem to have at least some grasp on a pretty broad range of issues. Clearly, he did put a lot of work into preparing, and I mean that's something, I guess. Bruce, I don't know if you want to add anything.
So that was great. It was interesting. I think first thing, just in terms of demeanor, he was very calm and very polished, and seemed very comfortable in front of the committee. And I think we had seen him in a presidential campaign, and he came off, I thought, a lot more skilled than I had expected, and seemed to. He was a more compelling figure, and I think a certain amount of decency that he has about him that really comes through, and sincerity. I'm going to just add a little bit to the issues that you raised, but I think you're right that these are the broad themes that are most important, and I think we need to keep them in mind and how they fit in with our work. He was very interested, obviously, in relying on individual development. He also had this idea of a holistic approach to things. So he thought that housing shouldn't be done in isolation without addressing issues of health and education and job training, and that came up in many regards, and he talked about working with with other departments to coordinate that. He did talk, he has brought up this issue of doing some financial education work, and that fits in with the work that we do, and he didn't seem to be aware of housing counseling particularly, and well, I think we've encouraged several senators to submit questions around education. It didn't seem like it was top on his mind, but I think we'll have opportunities to try to position our role in all that.
Just to jump in there,
sure.
As Ellie pointed out on a call yesterday, I mean, it essentially sounded like he was in favor of creating some sort of a housing counseling program. So it's not great that he seems clearly not aware of it, but he seems to clearly really like the idea. So
yeah, good. So interestingly, so he comes with a lot of medical knowledge, and he was a doctor at Johns Hopkins Hospital, affiliated with the university, and had patients from East Baltimore, and made references to them, and was very concerned about lead paint and the damage that it does to people, and also asthma. And these are environmental issues, but clearly also related to housing. So interesting that this was a big issue for him. One of the statistics he quoted was that the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison population. And HUD was not bringing about the elevation of large numbers of people, he said, in that context. I mean, and certainly a compelling argument on that side of it. He also he had a definition of true compassion, and that's when he was talking about designing programs. He said, not we should not do things where we feel good about what we are doing, but instead we should feel good about what the people who we're trying to help are doing. And and I think we can interpret that as a more outcomes-based approach, and trying to figure out how we might position ourselves in that, but that does fit neatly with some of the work that we do. And he repeatedly had variations on the theme of everyone we don't develop, we lose their talent. And interestingly enough, he mentioned that he thought the country was divided by income, by race, by age, and gender, and that HUD is well positioned to bring about healing, but not very specific about what that meant. Matthew talked about fair housing, and he said about the fair housing programs that we were paying people to go out and look for problems, and clearly meant that as a negative, but did say the Fair Housing Act was essential, and that they would enforce the fair housing rules. He said he had no problem with integration or affirmative action, but problems with centralized dictation. And also said that he would honor existing law when it comes to LGBTQ issues, but then also qualified by saying that no one gets extra rights, which I know is a sort of a right-wing thing. I'm not sure what it means exactly in this context, but it was a pretty clear statement that they would respect the rules that exist today. I mean, as Matthew said, he repeatedly talked about entrepreneurial efforts and capital formation in different ways as the way to really improve the quality of life for people. At one point, he was asked about the minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage, and issues like that, and he fell back on those themes again. That the job was to make people more competitive, so that their skills allow them to get paid better. But clearly a very market-driven model. Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, who was new and actually was just forming her staff, was very strong in these hearings, and very good, and was the first person to really bring up the issue around foreclosures, and raised concerns about the reliance on Wall Street as the source of capital formation. He said that it's important to get money to come in, but wouldn't let predatory lenders swoop in, or predatory persons swoop in. Though no definition of what he thought needed to be done to prevent that, but it's important that it's a marker on the list. There was also an interesting exchange in the very early days. I think it was Elizabeth Warren who brought it up, about asking if he would put in any provisions, or could he guarantee to the taxpayers that no HUD program went to benefit President-elect Trump or his businesses or his family. And he did not commit to anything, as not surprisingly, but his reply was that he would not design any program that would benefit any individual American, and would only do things that would benefit people generally. The one thing he talked about was to do more of a listening tour, and to do that inside HUD, and to do it around the country. And the idea would be that early on in the administration, he would get out and view sites, and that would be a vehicle for helping form policy. So the actual vote for his confirmation is on Tuesday. We are expecting it to sail through, and not there are many fights that are going on right now in around nomination hearings, and so that probably, so the Carson one won't be the flashpoint we're expecting. There is somebody who is going to be in at HUD the first few days from the Sarasota Housing Authority, a guy named William Russell, and he is an experienced housing guy, and I don't know what the expectations are for him in terms of the ongoing administration, but they wanted to get somebody in quickly, and so he'll be a caretaker until Carson is in office, which I assume is just going to be a few days, but he's well, actually, he's, it says here he's been accepted an offer to be a special assistant to the HUD secretary. So maybe has an ongoing role as well. So anybody who's familiar with his work from Florida, would love to hear from you. Shoot a note into the question box, and we'll talk to you about it. Be interested to hear what your experience is. I don't know. I'm not familiar with him myself. So a few things that I think we're thinking about from all this. One is that we really need to focus on the role that we have in terms of personal self-sufficiency and helping people succeed. That we are highly localized in the delivery of our services and the responsiveness to the local markets. That we are deeply committed to private-public partnerships, and so our lender relationships, our relationships with insurers, with real estate agents, all those pieces are part of the puzzle, and we are part of the team there. And that our programs do leverage private capital aggressively. I would also throw out that education is a huge part of our work, and that we should be kind of the delivery mechanism for HUD's homeownership education programs. And so what do we think about in terms of specifically what we might do with all this? So we're going to ask for a meeting with the secretary, and in the same way that we were able to meet early on with Secretaries Donovan and Castro, and I'm sure this will just be a leadership meeting, but the idea will be to kind of position our work and our involvement in the administration, and really emphasize the themes we just talked about. On the listening tour, we'll work very hard to try to get some housing counseling sites to be some of the stops on such a tour, and hopefully think we, in all of these meetings, we should be very interested in not only having housing counseling represented, but also enthusiastic, supportive lenders and clients. And I think that will help broaden our message. One of the great things that I think has happened over the course of this year is there are a number of lenders and the Mortgage Bankers Association who have become both local MBA members and national, who have become strong advocates of our work, and we absolutely need to make them part of the conversation with what looks like the new HUD that we're going to be working with in the future. One of the discussions that we've had with the coalition of HUD intermediaries and among ourselves at NHRC is to make an ask on funding, to actually do an ask for an increase in funding in order to be able to do our work more effectively. And I think it's a little bit outrageous, but I think it's worth putting it out there, as given that we're a very low-ticket, low-cost program, high return for what they're expecting. I'll throw out one more kind of idea that we should be aware of and thinking of, and that is that it's not, there are a number of proposals coming out of some of the right-wing think tanks like Heritage Foundation. Heritage put together a proposal that really talked about dismantling most HUD programs, and I mean, they're talking about doing away with the community block grant program. That's politically impossible. I don't think Republicans would ever do that. But you know, those kind of ideas are floating out there. Well, in the context of what we've heard, it's possible that some of the funding programs may move more to local decision making rather than being decided in DC headquarters. And if that's the case, I mean, I think you all are still well positioned with your local governments, and should certainly stay in touch with them. You know, we'll see what happens over the course of the year, but that's a possibility, and there may be. And if that does become that, I mean, you'll still be well positioned to be able to work with your local governments to try to capture what might have been decided nationally. But I'm not saying I know anything. I really don't. We'll see. We'll see, and we'll certainly keep you informed as things move forward.
Yeah, so there's a few questions.
Okay.
Someone asked if there's any possibility that the director of the Office of Housing Counseling, so Sarah Jaric, that she would be replaced.
She is not a political appointee. She's a career appointee, and I'm very pleased to say that she's committed to staying in her position, and very interested in working with the new administration around housing counseling issues. She's been thinking deeply about how to make this all work, and you know, one more reason why we think she's just absolutely a wonderful person at HUD. She's, I think, going to be very helpful in the early days of the transition to help let us get our work done well. So I think there's very good news there. So the short answer is no, she's a career position, and she's, I think, committed to the role.
Great. Someone asked, will HUD continue issuing grant funding for the housing programs? I assume that's the housing counseling program.
So when the 2017 budget is passed, they will have an allocation for housing counseling, and it will proceed. I mean, I can't imagine that they won't use the NOFA process to allocate the money. Sort of, if that gets rethought, we, you know, we'll be interested in seeing that. But I mean, I think for 2017, I can't imagine they'll do more than at this point work with what money becomes available through the budget. And we're expecting that all that will be settled in April.
All right. I'll just say there's a question about Councilor Max and HCO that we're gonna cover that in a minute. So we'll just hold on to that for now. And just if you could repeat the name of the guy from Sarasota who's going to be
William Russell,
who I think runs the Sarasota Housing Authority. I mean, the one article I read said that he essentially turned it around from being, I mean, I think HUD had kind of stepped in and was running it, and he was a former HUD. He ran, I forget which department at HUD, but was credited with kind of turning it around and making it I don't know in what way exactly, but okay, that's all for questions.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. So Steve Mnuchin is up right now, and I haven't been monitoring it, but Matthew, you've been on it, so he's Treasury.
Right. So, and this is more, I mean, Treasury obviously has had impact on our work, but I think it's more kind of interesting to people is he ran One West, which was formerly IndyMac, essentially bought it, and I wasn't around for doing this work during the foreclosure crisis, so I can only say by way of reputation that One West's reputation was quite horrible. So when he was nominated, you know, a lot of progressive groups have been talking about him as the foreclosure king. Bruce, I'm sure if he wants can share some more details, and I'm sure folks on the call are familiar with One West. So his confirmation hearing is going on now. I'd say he's getting pretty well hammered on the foreclosure issue, particularly by the Democrats, although at least one Republican, Senator Heller from Nevada, was also pretty tough on him with respect to foreclosures. I guess one other kind of relevant thing, so there also was the Democrats, and being led by Senator Warren, had tried to get homeowners who were been impacted by One West, and there were just horrible stories. There was one story that they foreclosed on a woman over a 27-cent deficiency. She had written a check for 3 cents when it should have been 30, and they proceeded to foreclosure over that 27-cent difference. There were a number of just horrifying stories. The Democrats had tried to get the Republicans to let them have some of the homeowners who had been impacted by One West at the hearing today. They would not allow that, so they did what they called kind of a shadow hearing yesterday, where they had 4 or 5 homeowners and then the director of the California Reinvestment Coalition, who's done a lot of kind of anti-Mnuchin work, testify and share their stories, which was very powerful. The one other kind of relevant thing to our work, he very clearly is blaming the crisis on, and the Republicans, the Republican panel members are reiterating this point and kind of setting it up for him, blaming the crisis on government programs that that expanded home ownership when they shouldn't. He very clearly believes that, thinks that One West didn't do anything wrong, that the culprit was the government, and that these programs shouldn't have existed in the first place, and that One West was just doing what they kind of had to do. He's claiming that they were really, one of the best performers in terms of modifications and avoiding foreclosure, which I think people who know their work would completely disagree with. So that's what's going on. And someone asked, it's Stephen Mnuchin, M-N-U-C-H-I-N. He was the head of One West. He also was somehow involved in the film industry, but he is now the Treasury Secretary designate.
Yes, and on top of that, well, so the actually just on that on the One West story, the FDIC had taken over IndyMac, the bank, and it was kind of a miserable lender. They had implemented a program that was basically a modification in a box, where they figured out what people's incomes were, and then would just send them a mod and ask them to sign it, and send it back, and people would get modifications. It was a streamlined program that had was quite successful. They did not continue with that. Their appeals process was lousy, and we had lots and lots of problems with them once FDIC was no longer involved. The so it's worrisome about what their view of home ownership is. And these issues become important when you dealing with the down payment, how much down payment is required, and those sorts of kinds of issues. And they may have a real impact on the level of home ownership in this country, and especially in communities of color and in lower income communities. So so we'll keep our eyes on all that. Actually, now that you say it, there's also Wilbur Ross is up for the Department of Commerce, and won't directly involve us as well, but Wilbur Ross is most famous for buying failed steel factories and getting them back online. But he owned, for a while, he bought bankrupt American Home Mortgage Servicing, AMC we called it, which was another bad lender, largely subprime. I mean, they did everything, but they were just a sales machine and nothing else. No commitment to the customer in any length of time. And they purchased Option One, which was another subprime lender and servicer, and I think not a particularly good lender, but the servicing, at least, we were able to get some deeper deals and get people modifications. They, when the staff became part of AMC, their flexibility declined, and it was as effective a servicer by the option one people were not as effective when they were at AMC. Ultimately, they sold the business off and went to Ocwen and I guess to some other services as well. And they're not, it's not part of his portfolio anymore. But, you know, a piece of history that a number of us lived through. Did want to acknowledge, actually, that people have, that it was helpful. I know some people supplied stories on foreclosure cases for One West and Financial Freedom. That was the reverse mortgage lender, and we appreciate that those people, I think especially Nevada and Arizona, where there were some submissions. So thank you for that. Another thing that's just we should be aware of is that there's an unrelenting attack on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has been very helpful to us in terms of consumer protections and better servicing standards, and a variety of predatory practices have been eliminated or constrained because of the work of the CFPB. There is a big drive to try to dilute the power of the CFPB and to remove Rich Cordray, who has been a very effective director, and also to make it a commission of 5 people appointed by political party, which makes a much less effective organization to move. Generally, commissions are not as aggressive or as directed as organizations that have single directors. So there'll probably be a big fight there, and you know, the people working in that area, Americans for Financial Reform, have asked that we do all we can to speak up in favor of the CFPB and help build the public image of the CFPB during this time, and certainly to communicate to our congressional offices support of the CFPB. So we'll see where that all goes. One other quick note is there was a meeting, a panel of Republican housing experts last week in Washington, D.C. at the Urban Institute. And it was Mark Calabria, who is at the Cato Institute, I think, Michael Bright, who was a staffer for the Banking Committee, Rick Lazio, former New York congressman, and Sean Krause from Quicken. And you know, the interesting thing about the conversation was, I think I'll just say 3 quick highlights about it. People were clearly very well informed about housing issues. So you always were worried about that. These people had deep knowledge and brought their expertise in. Rick Lazio opened up by saying that every state in the country has a sizable percentage of its population that's rent burdened, meaning that people are paying more than 37% of their income towards rent, and many states have large numbers of people who are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. So an important issue, and there seemed to be support across the board on the panel for the low-income housing tax credit, which is, of course, the vehicle for doing multifamily housing. That it's the most common and widely used vehicle for doing affordable housing, multifamily, and it's seen in some parts of the right as being under attack. They seem to be supportive of it. There was also widespread agreement around FHA, so that FHA has a role, and that's interesting because the Heritage Foundation basically said that FHA should get out of the mortgage business and disband over time. And these experts were really saying no. And one other interesting thing was that Mark Calabria said that there should be he would find it acceptable to do a 1 basis point increase in the MIP, the mortgage interest payment, for administrative costs for FHA. So one of the problems that FHA has is its technology is rooted back in the 1980s. I mean, they still use COBOL, and Sean Krause, who was very interesting at this panel, she's from Quicken, and she really brought a practitioner's viewpoint of this. And she just said that FHA needs to improve its performance, and that the system apparently goes down for a week at a time. I can't imagine, you know, the thousands of mortgages going through it, that it's possible that it goes down for a week. But that's what she said, and they widely recognize that there need to be investment in staff and 21st century technology, and that was a way to get there. And that, well, the two congressional people took some ribbing because they were talking about an allocation that was off budget. So this would be money that would go through FHA without going through the Treasury. It was seemed to be everybody thought that was a helpful idea. You know, so these and the other thing they talked about was Dodd-Frank, and they felt like that Dodd-Frank would not be that there would only be modest changes to Dodd-Frank, and it wasn't as high a priority as other things that were being worked on, especially in the Senate. GSE reform was the other big thing. So what happens with Fannie and Freddie going forward, and nobody had a good prediction of what would happen on that. All of which is to say that, you know, things were maybe a little bit more moderate than I had expected going into the conversation, and deeper awareness of some of the problems that are facing our communities. There was a lot of interest in rural issues, and including rural homelessness and veterans homelessness. So I assume that means that we're likely to see more attention being paid there. So so I think that's, yeah, I think maybe we've spent enough time on that. So let's go up to, so Fannie Mae convened a symposium last Wednesday around housing counseling, and it was meant to bring in lenders and Fannie and housing counseling leadership into a conversation about how to get housing counseling to be more mainstreamed and built into the and to take advantage of the strengths that housing counseling has. So one of the questions was around technology and what will happen in the future. And I know we've done work on trying to improve, especially HCO, but HCO and Counselor Max. And I know I hear regularly about the problems that each institution is having in the field with their help desks, with their outdated technologies. So NeighborWorks has been going through a whole process for the past couple of years about what a new 21st century client management system might look like, and has decided to partner with Housing Partnership Network rather than creating its own Counselor Max replacement. Housing Partnership Network, as you know, has been working with others to create framework, and has been working with Salesforce to develop a client management system that would be state-of-the-art, but not have to build it from scratch, but use the highly refined technologies of Salesforce. And while Housing Partnership Network has a large network of community development corporations, NeighborWorks and them coming together makes this you know, a much bigger and more viable project. They are looking at this as something that may not stay as an HPN project, but become a separate standalone corporate entity, and would need to be able to pay its own way. But what they're talking about are the kinds of things that make it easy for you to navigate when you go to order something from Amazon or get tickets or whatever. This would be that level of order. And the idea would be you would populate your data in, and it would then allow you to have customized reports, but do all the reports that are required for HUD and for local entities. Salesforce would have the flexibility for agencies that have multiple programs that are not just housing counseling in their work, that those could all be managed through Salesforce, and some agencies currently have their own version of Salesforce that they're using. And I think what will happen, I was reading between the lines here, but I think what would happen is the idea would be that there'd be not only a client management system, but you could also on your website have an intake portal that would allow clients to fill in and submit documentation, and that would then populate into the database as well. So the reason it's, I think it's important for all of us to be aware of this. This is, they've been working on it for some time, but it's not like ready to roll out. It's in the client management thing. I think it's just going to be getting the test phase soon, but it's a possibility for the future that seems very promising. It's also in talking with the Fannie people, it sounded like they were committed to, if this, I think they're investing some money in, and they are committed that if this comes to fruition and there's broad endorsement by the industry, that they would pay for transferring client databases from HCO into Salesforce, so that those would be populated at their expense. Presumably, NeighborWorks would have some review around CounselorMax, since it's going to be there, since they're so deeply involved in it, which would really help the transition of all this a lot. So we'll keep you informed. We've talked with the HPN people about coming on at some point when it's more refined, so that you can get a viewpoint of what it looks like. And I don't know about cost structure, but somehow the bills have to get paid on this. I think some lenders are contributing some money to this project as well, so that there's the development costs may be addressed, but there'll be operational costs that any system will have, and we have to figure out how that gets paid. But that would be, but I mean, I think it's a promising alternative out there. There are others as well that some of you are using other systems, and and I think that there's one that HPF, the Home Ownership Preservation Foundation, is working on as well, that would, I assume, work for their customers, their teams, but they have mentioned that it could be available to others as well. So I think that's all I have at the moment on that, but wanted to make sure people were familiar with what's happening.
So there's a bunch of questions that we can go through.
I may not be able to answer them. I just downloaded everything I know. Okay, let's start.
All right, and I think actually you, after some of the questions were asked, probably covered some of it, but we'll just run through them. I mean, first, if you could just give a little explanation of what Salesforce is.
Well, so Salesforce is a long-established database that was originally developed for salespeople, and it's just a very large, very reasonably flexible database program. But it's some of us old dogs had to use it in the past when it was you had to have quite a bit of training to do it. They've improved it and made it more intuitive and more flexible, as I understand it. And but it's a large, well-seasoned, broadly used by the business world, but certainly nonprofits use it as well. And it's highly evolved, I think, is the thing about it.
All right, and so just to clarify, Fannie Mae is considering partnering with HPN on this?
So HPN and NeighborWorks are, as I understand it, partnering on this. Fannie Mae contribute some money towards it and support it. The one thing I think is clearest that I know for sure is that if it's successful, they will pay for clients being transferred from their system off of HCO onto that system, so that they will no longer have HCO at some point.
All right, there's quite a bit on cost, which I think you kind of covered.
I have no idea. I really have no idea. I mean, I think it's all done by nonprofits, so they're deeply aware of the cost challenges. But I did ask, and people mean that it's a work in progress right now.
I think you covered, would the new system be available for all counselors? I think the idea is that it would be, correct?
Yeah, eventually, yes. Yeah.
Someone pointing out that HCO is free.
I know.
Someone more by way of a comment, but saying that they're not sure why replacing HCO or CMAX would be necessary. But you also did cover how would the information transfer over to the new system. More on cost.
You know, I should just say, and just as a practitioner like you all are, that HCO and Counselor Max are both very creaky, old school programs that are whatever replaces these will just have a great deal more capacity, and partly, you know, there's another issue also, which is around the security issues of our data, and this is a strength that Salesforce, I think, has, and it's one that we need to be aware of, is that in order to work with banks, there's a certain level of security that you need. It actually would be worth figuring out if Salesforce meets those thresholds, but there's certainly much more geared towards the 21st century sets of issues on that.
All right. We had someone pointing out that there are other systems being developed. eHome America, they said, is also developing a state-of-the-art system. So I think,
really? Good. Okay.
I'm sure can discuss that on a future call.
Great. Yeah.
So someone got called away, but the question is CMAX no more? I think you said that eventually will be no more. Is that the
right? But there'll be a good deal of time before this is all finalized.
And we don't know what the timeline is, though.
No,
they said,
I mean,
is this repeal and replace?
Thank you, whoever said that. You know, one way, okay, we're all in a speculative world, but October 1 is our contract year. There may be some goals to try to meet by then, but I can't imagine that everything will be settled by then.
So there honestly are a ton of questions here that I think that we probably can't answer, and I think there's going to be more details coming as this gets fleshed out. I think it's still relatively in the development stages, so maybe we should just leave it there for now and just say there'll be more to come on this.
Right, and just really just telling you that this is an awareness of what's to come, not that we know that much about it. I'm certainly not involved in the development or the design. So, you know, as we learn more, we'd be very glad to have you. And if there are other systems that are excellent out there that we should feature, we're interested in doing that as well to make sure that people get the best information they can. Good. So another thing that out of the symposium, Fannie Mae committed to doing some work on finding a better name for housing counselor, and with it was clear that on that list that Matthew put up here, Housing Advisor has a much stronger leg up than anybody else on that list. And they are interested in doing, I think, consumer focus groups and other things to try to figure out what it would take and what the advantages would be. This does dovetail some with what I think on our call 2 weeks ago, Sarah floated the possibility of Housing Advisor and using a name change around the whole certification process. And I would love to hear what people think about this. You know, we spent some time 3 or 4 years ago really trying to build a consensus around another name, and you know, we didn't get there. So, but you know, if the time's ready for it now, I think we have a number of advocates who are saying that we should. Then we'll, I mean, we good to know. And if we have an incredibly obstinate team of people who say don't change it over my dead body, then you know that would be good to know as well. So, you know, let's people should feel free to weigh in. I know some groups are already using Housing Advisor, and some people are using other names. But it's important that we end up with one consistent messaging. One of the things that we will work on this year, as we did last year, is to try to build a lot more understanding and agreement around in the public mind about housing counseling and why you would go and when you would go. And if we're not calling it all the same thing, it becomes much, much harder. So please feel free to weigh in. Has anybody weighed in on this one?
Yeah, there have been a number, but I think mostly the ones we've discussed: specialist, counselor. I think we've had this conversation a number of times, and you know, it's pretty similar. Educator, certified housing advisor. So,
okay. So we'll keep you informed as we learn, and we may have Fannie join us on a call to kind of have them give us their what they're learning in their process as well. Good. So let's see. I think one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is what is the most useful thing for NHRC to be doing right now, or things. And one of them will be to really work on this private market solutions, about trying to create funding streams that will be from industry, from lenders, and from investors that will support the housing counseling work. I think we've mentioned this before, but there is a proposal to have to create a kind of more integrated housing counseling approach with several lenders. The idea would be the lenders fund a marketing program that is aimed at increasing the pool of who is thinking of buying a house, and having them come to counseling as their first step, rather than talking to a real estate agent, rather than talking to a lender, getting them through the system, using the national industry standards as the standards, and then everybody gets offered at least 3 lender opportunities, and the cases then get to the lender, and the counseling agency gets funded for, and probably at this point, not everything, but certainly some of the cost of doing the counseling, and and there's hopefully a communication link between the counselor and the underwriting unit, so that to help people through the process. and then at the end, after closing, that there's some feedback loop, so if people get into trouble, they could come back to counseling. But the idea is that it come with, that it's not just a fee-for-service program, but that it's a fee-for-service program that creates a flow of clients to the counseling agency. And hopefully there'll be a pilot starting this spring with a few agencies and a few lenders, with the idea of us trying to grow this over the course of the next year or two and make this into a bigger part of our business. We will still try to encourage more fee-for-service relationships out there. Very interested in monitoring what the experience is on the Home Ready program for Fannie Mae, where Fannie's paying $500 to the lender for the counseling work and trying to make sure that that money, that all that money then flows to the counseling agency. So you are the test cases out there, so when you've got Home Ready cases, please let us know what's happening. We need to know specifics. Did you get $500? Which lenders? Where were their problems? And we will be glad to elevate and start pushing on wherever there's problems. But we definitely need to know what's happening there. We're also working on the modification side of things. I wish we could have a firmer grasp on what's happening in FHA, which I think is a place where it has big opportunity. We do know that some of the servicers are thinking about trying to more universally pay for counseling, and we're trying to get Fannie and Freddie to create an exception process on their new flex modification. And the idea would be that a certain population of people who get offered flex mods would be referred to counseling if the mod doesn't kind of meet a certain kind of threshold. And I think the couple of ideas that we've kicked around, and again, this is just theory now. It's not a program, but the idea might be if people get a modification that offer that's less than 20%, or if they have a lot of equity in the property, that those two populations might be sent to counseling, and the counselor might say, oh, you know, you actually got a pretty good deal. The flex mod is as good as it's going to get. And others, you say, well, you're going to, in order to reach affordability, we need to do something extra like lowering the interest rate. So those are, we're trying to get Fannie to embrace this, trying to get Freddie to embrace this, and FHFA to embrace this idea. And we'll see where things land. We're in the early part of those discussions. Definitely interested in other ideas out there of what might be helpful. And let's see, we're running out of time here, so we'll make more efforts around collaboration and trying to get local efforts to get counseling agencies to work together. I think this will be particularly important in the current environment, where it's likely that some resources may move from the national level to local levels. We'll do some more work on rural, and we just formed a task force on rural issues. So if you haven't volunteered for it yet and you're interested and have some knowledge, just shoot me an email right now, and we're going to try to get our first call going in the next couple of weeks. We're going to do a lot of work around this kind of reaching out to HUD and Republicans around the role that we could play in kind of helping the economy and the individuals and this whole effort to develop self-sufficiency, which is a big theme in their work. Okay, well, we ran out of time, so I think just I want to say thank you very much. We just got a whole flood of groups that renewed on their own without us even sending a renewal notice. We really thank you so much on that. If you haven't joined NHRC, please go to the link, and you will. We can get you a. There's a membership form there, or just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you, along with a quick note. Lots of good benefits, but the real reason to join is to be to really support our work, and a fifth of our budget is membership dues, so you're pretty essential to us keeping alive, and it's been really, really helpful. And I really appreciate it. I know it's not always, this isn't an easy time for our business, and we really, members have really held strong and stayed, and some have increased their membership commitment, and that means a lot. We really appreciate that a lot. We'll have our next call in early February, and we will have, I'm sure, a lot more to say about what's happening at HUD, and we'll definitely want to fill you in on what progress we're making on these programs, and soon we'll be doing a series on innovation and housing counseling as well, and start some of those as well. So keep up the great work. We have a lot to do. Thanks. Bye.